Hi, team, and welcome to another episode of the Health is Wealth podcast. And there's just the two of us today. There's myself and Greg. And yeah, this is episode 22. Now, slightly a different subject that we discuss in today. And it's around changes within your life when it comes to your career, when it comes to work and business. Maybe you've been laid off, maybe your role got restructured, maybe you've walked away from what you've been doing for years. And is the truth that nobody talks about when your professional identity gets shaken? Health is usually the first thing to slip. Workouts get skipped, meals become whatever's easy, and sleep drifts because you've got a lot on your mind. So what I wanted to do was go through on different things that we would like to put in place that we feel is going to help to get through it. And because, like I say, the motivation dips, you tend to be less disciplined. And Greg written an amazing article on this around discipline. And Greg, I spoke to Greg yesterday, and he said he'd like to discuss it with everyone because he feels it'll really help. So, Greg, should we get into it, buddy?
Yeah, let's do it. So maybe I can provide a little bit of color here. So as it relates to this topic of, kind of career transitions and some of the dynamics that Craig was just describing. So I've been at my current company for about 4 years, but actually before that, where I was, it just was not going well at all. It was a smaller startup company. We never found our way. Like I had this very not great relationship with our CEO, who was actually a friend, and so on. And so, there's all this kind of stuff. And eventually I decide to leave the company. Um, but at that point, and ideally I didn't want to do that, but that's just like what ended up having to happen. And so a lot of what Craig was just describing were like things that I was experiencing at that point in my life personally, which is, I've decided to leave a job. In some cases, people don't get to make that decision. It just kind of happens to them, right? But then in the midst of that, like all of my focus was like, I need to go find another job. I need to, like I have kids at home and like I need to pay a mortgage and I need to, do all these things. And in that context, it just felt like very selfish in some ways, or, maybe not the top priority to be trying to like eat well or take care of myself or, things like that. Like I felt like I just need to spend all day, every day, trying to find, this new job and so on. And in my case, I was relatively fortunate that that didn't go on for like that long before I was able to, kind of find my next thing. But like all of the things that Craig was sort of describing in terms of, you know, putting, health second and that kind of stuff, like I definitely experienced. And, what ended up happening is that like really caught up with me. And that was part of my impetus in terms of like wanting to join EBC, probably about a year later at that point, and then make a bunch of changes in my life. One of those changes is that I've always viewed myself as like a hard worker, as someone that was, sort of dependable or, that kind of thing. But if I'm being honest, I don't know that I would like call myself like disciplined in the sense that like being a hard worker or being dependable was trying to meet other people's expectations or meet a deadline that was kind of imposed upon me. Like the identity part of that was like I need to like please other people or I need to somehow like measure up to someone else's expectations as opposed to it being more of a like internally driven thing. And the challenge with that is that if like the all you're trying to do is satisfy someone else's set of expectations, you then kind of like lose control over your identity in a lot of ways because it's at the whim of what someone else might think or what someone else might say or those kinds of things. And so I've tried to make this very conscious effort towards it being much more of an internal motivator in terms of and being much more intentional in my life in terms of like, here are the things that I'm doing and here's why I'm doing them. And one of the things that we talk a lot about within EBC is like connecting to a broader why. And there's a really great quote that I love. I think it's Nietzsche, but he basically says like, if you have a strong enough why, you can endure any how, right? So it's like if you know like what it is that you're trying to accomplish in life, if you know the kind of person that you're trying to become, even if it's hard to do what you need to do on a daily basis or uncomfortable to do on a daily basis, like what you need to do, like you're going to find a way to do that because you're trying to achieve this like kind of broader thing in your life, right? And so with respect to this document that I shared on Slack a little while ago, I called it my discipline manifesto, but it's like, at least for me, like I really do view like discipline and kind of mental toughness and mindset and so on as this big unlock, at least for me, that I feel like I've discovered in my life. And I wanted to kind of capture some of the thoughts, sort of around that. And I would say that like a big part of that, just as a starting point, is really that uh, that I can be someone that other people can have confidence in, right? But it's because of who I am, not about like specifically what it is I'm doing for them or whether or not I'm like meeting their expectation, that I can really like live in alignment with what I think is kind of be most important, and that in the course of being able to own my own stuff or lead myself, like I can, lead other people. And so as part of that, I put together this thing where I sort of talk about that, some kind of core beliefs, some what I called identity commitments, and then some anchoring phrases, meaning that like in the moment of, when things get hard and so on, like what are things that I can sort of say to myself or cue myself on around that. So that's kind of the background and the backstory here. And then I'll let kind of Craig decide what parts of this we want to probe most into.
Yeah, and like over the years, working with guys like executives through career transitions, and I always see the same pattern. When they feel to, they tend to wait to feel motivated, and but motivation, it just doesn't show up when you're anxious, when you've got things on your mind, and anxiety thrives on inaction, but momentum kills anxiety. Now, think of momentum like a flywheel. That first push is heavy. The second isn't much easier. But once the wheel starts spinning, you carry yourself, forward without as much effort. And I remember a guy years ago I was coaching, and he was a vice president. He was from Canada, and he lost his job. He'd been in for around about 14 years, I'm sure it was. And obviously, he felt like his world had fell apart, which I can understand. And like Greg mentioned about, we've got mortgages to pay, we've got to look after our families, and a lot of people depend on us, So I want to get into things that we can put in place, actions we can put in place, because it's pointless trying to feel like to hide, if that makes sense. Not want to get up on a morning, starting with one thing at a time, like getting out on a morning, getting up and going for a walk. That's like starting that flywheel, then hit back to hitting your water targets and structured meals. By week 2, this guy's whole energy shifted because he finally felt in control again. And this is what we need to focus on, trying to get back in control, because if we don't, it affects us in ways that we just feel lost, we feel lonely, and we don't want, obviously, and then it rubs off on family and things like that. We get, anxious, and so things that we can focus on, we can control, is slowly getting back into things, slowly introducing exercise back in, because there'll be times when you don't want to train. Like, there's been a huge transition myself at the moment. And I get up in the morning, I don't want to train, but I do, because I know when I do, I feel in control. I feel good. It makes me feel good. It releases them endorphins where we feel amazing. And when we start eating rubbish, we feel rubbish. And it's diving in more, like, deeper into it. Like, a lot of people, what I found with this guy, he stopped tracking his calories, he stopped doing everything. So we slowly need to introduce things back in place to feel in control again.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, in terms of what Craig was just saying, I mean, I would really emphasize this point about, anxiety thriving on inaction or just, ambiguity. I've certainly found that to be the case. And I think, certainly in a situation where, potentially lost a job, there's something else kind of going on within your life, it's really easy to kind of say, well, I just need to kind of like wait until things turn the corner, right? Or until circumstances change, right? And then, when I get lucky in that way again, then, everything will be okay. But the problem is that it's like you have no idea when or if that's really going to happen. And so then, at least for me, like I found that I was spending all of this time just like wondering and worrying, how quickly is this going to happen, or what's gonna, and it felt, to Craig's point, like very out of control, right? It felt like my whole life was kind of out of my control, and I was just this kind of player in it, that was kind of being kind of whisked around. And one way that I really like to think about this is that within my life, I can either act or be acted upon, right? And to the extent that you're just like waiting for motivation to come, or you're just like waiting for something else to happen, like you're being acted upon. And I think, what Craig was saying, and is consistent with my experience, is that it feels way better to act, right? And to exert that bit of control. Now, you may not be able to fully control the outcome in the sense of, well, will I get a job that pays me a certain amount and is my dream thing within X time frame and so on, right? But there are a whole bunch of inputs, right, that you can, kind of control in your life. And the more that you control those inputs, the more likely the outputs are going to be like what you want. And certainly along the way, like it's going to feel materially different if, at least it was in my case, right? And so, having some daily non-negotiables in terms of, either eating a certain way, getting, certain amount of activity in terms of steps, getting workouts in. I've definitely found that like self-care, kind of, and consistency around self-care, makes a big difference in terms of, how I show up and so on. Um, and basically just saying like, look, I'm going to do these things whether or not I feel like it or not, right? Because I know that afterward, even if I don't feel like it before, I know based on experience that after I'm going to feel way better, right? And it's going to like kind of give me this boost, or it's going to lead to this like broader outcome that I'm trying to drive towards.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. That was great. And yeah, and I want to finish on, like, a bit my story, where when 25 years ago, when I transitioned away from the family business, I was CEO of the family business. Hold once, let me. I was CEO of the family business, and I could have easily drifted. It was a huge decision because I was one of the main shareholders within the business, and I walked away without a penny. I didn't ask for any of the shares of the business. I walked away to follow my passion, which is what I'm doing now. And it was hard. It was very hard. A lot of quiet space. I couldn't. It, I felt lonely, but I anchored myself into non-negotiables like walks, training, calorie control. These simple actions are what stopped the spiral and basically built the foundation for the life I live now. And like a few of the things that like I put in place was being disciplined, exactly what Greg was talking about. And I started with like these quick wins that I'm going to share with you now. And journaling, 3 wins journal, I used to call it, and I still do now. Write 3 daily wins every night. What's gone well? And a 1-1-1 protocol, which I might introduce within the program one day. One workout, one healthy meal, one reflection each day, and bookending the day, I used to call it. Walking, evening reflection, and that creates structure. And I feel that this really helped me get through it to what like I say, I walked away. Yes, I had some savings, but I had a family to feed. I had a mortgage to pay. And I got through it. And I always say to people, if I can do it, anyone could do it. So what I'll do, I'm going to put a sheet together and I'll also share Greg's discipline manifesto as well. That's okay with you, isn't it, Greg? Yeah.
Yep.
And which Greg's already shared it, but it'd be good to have a read through that as well. And I'll put a sheet together of how I did it. And I feel it really helped people because there's a lot of uncertainty in the world at the moment, and people are losing the jobs. People getting laid off. And we want to help as much as we can, obviously. Greg, do you want to end on anything or?
Yeah, I think maybe just one last thing that I would add here is that uh, when you're, as Craig was saying, like you get going with this, you build a foundation, and then you progressively build on that foundation. So I do think that as part of that, like it's also important to keep in mind that like you don't have to do an idealized version of things, right from the get-go, right? Like if you can pick just a couple of things, be consistent with them and so on, then it just starts to like build that flywheel that, Craig was talking about, right? And like once you kind of get that flywheel going, then you can sort of say, well, hey, look, like I had the one healthy meal, maybe now I'm gonna like have the 2 healthy meals, right? Or it's like, I did, this kind of a thing, but now I'm gonna like layer this other thing into the mix. And then you kind of like progressively get to where you want to go, as opposed to, creating this like big long list, like, okay, every day I'm gonna do these 10 things or something like that
Yeah.
because right out of the gate it's going to be hard to do that, and like the whole point here is to like build yourself up positively as opposed to like right from the get-go feeling like, oh well, here's this thing that I've failed at, or that I didn't measure up because I only did 6 out of 10 things, as opposed to celebrating the fact that you did 6 things, and like most people in life like don't do any, right? And so the other thing I would say in that regard is just like as much as possible, again, just speaking from personal experience, like try to avoid all or nothing thinking, in the sense of saying like, well, if I can't have the idealized version, or if I can't be perfect with all of these things every single day, then, or at least for today, like I'm not going to do any of them, right? Like, and because again, like that's going to just interrupt this cycle that you're trying to build. And so, give yourself a bit of grace, right? Be understanding of, what's going on in your life and things like that. And so there may be certain days or certain aspects of this that are not like quite the way that you would want to be, but there's always this opportunity to like reset. And you don't need to necessarily wait all the way to the next day to reset, right? You could just be like, hey, you know what? My morning didn't go the way that I want, but I can still like take control over like what I do this afternoon and this evening, right? And so how can I still get some of this in, or, that kind of stuff. It's just, I think just being in this mindset of, you know, I can't control everything that's going on, but I can still control the decisions that I'm making, where I apply some focus, whether or not I try to take care of myself in this way, and just be intentional, right, about where it is that you're trying to go. At least again from experience, like I think that will go a long way for folks. And as Craig said, like we're both here. There's other people in the community like that want to support you, and that where we want to support each other. So tap into the resources as well that you have in this, and like don't feel like you're going through this journey just entirely on your own, because you're not. So
Excellent. That was great, Greg. Thank you. And just to finish on that, don't overload yourself. Start with 2 to 3 non-negotiables and stack more later when you're starting to feel more like yourself. Waiting for motivation as well. Action first, momentum brings the feelings later. Anyway, guys, like Greg said, if you ever want to chat, just reach out to us anytime. We're here for you all, and have a fantastic day. Again, any episodes, any subjects that you feel that you want covering on the next episodes, just reach out, let us know, and we'll make sure we do.